Welcome back everyone, it is Mike from ManaHoarders. For the month of October, we are going to be bringing you another terrifying tribe from Magic's history. The commander in this video is known for throwing some pretty crazy Halloween parties. We hope you enjoyed this deck check for Rakdos, Lord of Riots. You can cast Rakdos, Lord of Riots for 2 black and 2 red mana. You get a 6/6 legendary demon with flying and trample. You can't cast Rakdos, Lord of Riots unless an opponent lost life this turn, but creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. Before we dive into the deck, let's go over a few key points. First up, the final price for this build came in at $74.74. This does include the price of our commander and all of our lands. Now, these prices will vary greatly depending on the quality of the cards you purchase, the vendor you use, and a variety of other factors. In terms of power level, I would rate this specific build at around a 6 out of 10 on the power scale. The theme of the deck is most definitely Demon Tribal. Now, we are including some creatures that are not demons, but mostly because they help us smooth out the deck and make it so we can cast our commander pretty regularly and use his ability more effectively. Now let's go ahead and dive into the deck. First up are our artifacts. Arcane Signet can tap to give us a color of our commander's color identity. Bontu's Monument can make our black creatures cost 1 less, and whenever we cast a creature spell, each opponent loses a life and we gain a life. Charcoal Diamond will tap to give us a black mana. Fire Diamond will tap to give us a red mana. Mind Stone can tap to give us a colorless. We can also sacrifice it to draw a card. Rakdos Signet gives us a black and a red. And Sol Ring can tap for 2 colorless mana. Moving on to our creatures, we will go over all of our non-demon creatures first. Anger, obviously this is beneficial because we want our demons to have haste so they can start dealing damage as quickly as possible. Blister Spit Gremlin, we included that to deal damage to our opponents. The same could be said for Brimstone Trebuchet. Burnished Heart will help us ramp. Cauldron Familiar, whenever it enters, it will deal damage to our opponents and gain us some life. Gibbering Fiend, whenever it enters the battlefield, it will deal 1 damage to each opponent. Plague Spitter, at the beginning of our upkeep, deals 1 damage to each creature and each player. Quakebringer makes it so our opponents can't gain life, and at the beginning of our upkeep deals 2 damage to each opponent. Sin Prodder has a nice upkeep trigger that will either be dealing damage to one of our opponents, or will be getting us a free card into our hand. Stormcaller, whenever it enters the battlefield, will deal 2 damage to each opponent. And Stormfist Crusader, at the beginning of our upkeep, each player draws a card and loses 1 life. And now for the demons we will be including. Archfiend of Depravity, at the beginning of each opponent's end step, that player chooses up to 2 creatures he or she controls and then sacrifices the rest. Bloodgift Demon, at the beginning of our upkeep, target player draws a card and loses a life. Demon of Dark Schemes, whenever it enters the battlefield, all other creatures get -2/-2. Demon of Wailing Agonies, it has Lieutenant. As long as we control our commander, it gets +2/+2, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player sacrifices a creature. Dread Hound, whenever it enters, we will mill 3, and whenever a creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from a library, each opponent loses 1. Dream Devourer gives each non-land card in our hand Foretell. Embodiment of Agonies, it gets a 1/1 counter on it for each different mana cost among non-land cards in our graveyard. Harvester of Souls, whenever another non-token creature dies, we can draw a card. Immersturm Raider, whenever it enters the battlefield, we will discard a card and then we can draw a card. Indulgent Tormentor, at the beginning of our upkeep, we can draw a card unless target opponent sacrifices a creature or pays 3. Overseer of the Damned, whenever it enters, we can destroy target creature. And whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, we get a 2/2 zombie tapped. Rakshasa Debaser, whenever it attacks, we can put target creature card from the defending player's graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. And Spawn of Mayhem, at the beginning of our upkeep, deals 1 damage to each player. Then if we have 10 or less life, it gets a 1/1 counter. And last but not least, for our legendary demon serving alongside Lord Rakdos, Carter Doomscourge. Whenever it enters, it will goad each creature our opponents control, and whenever an attacking creature dies, each opponent loses a life and we gain a life. Kothafed Soul Hoarder. Whenever a permanent owned by another player is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, we will draw a card and lose a life. Nephorox, Overlord of Grixis, has Exalted, and whenever it attacks alone, the defending player sacrifices a creature. Orcus, Prince of Undeath, synergizes very well with our commander, has Flying, Trample. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we will choose 1. Each other creature gets -X/-X and we lose X life, or return up to X target creature cards with total mana value X or less from our graveyard to the battlefield, and they gain haste until end of turn. And Varagoth, Bloodsky Sire, has an amazing boast ability. We can pay 1 in a black, and target player searches their library for a card, shuffles their library, and puts that card on top of it. Moving on to our enchantments, Impact Tremors. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, Impact Tremors deals 1 damage to each opponent. Limdual's Hex. During our upkeep, Limdual's Hex deals 1 damage to each player unless that player pays a black mana or 3 mana to prevent that damage. Necrosynthesis. The enchanted creature gets +1/+1 whenever a creature dies. And whenever the enchanted creature dies, we can look at the top X cards of our library where X is power. We can put one of those cards into our hand and the rest on the bottom of our library in a random order. Phyrexian Reclamation, we can pay 1 in the black, 2 life, and return target creature card from our graveyard to our hand. Retreat to Hagra, whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we can choose 1. We will always be choosing each opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. In Sanctum of Stone Fangs, at the beginning of our pre-combat main phase, each opponent loses X life and we gain X life, where X is the number of shrines we control. Moving on to our instance, this first card is a bit clunky but fits the flavor of the deck. Breath of Malphigor deals 5 damage to each opponent. Calibrated Blast, we reveal cards from the top of our library until we hit a non-land card. We put the revealed cards on the bottom of our library in a random order, and whenever we reveal a non-land card this way, it deals damage equal to that card's mana value to any target. Crushing Disappointment, each player loses 2 life, and we draw 2 cards. Dark Ritual gives us 3 black mana. Doomblade can destroy target non-black creature. Go for the Throat destroys target non-artifact creature. Thrill of Possibility, we will discard a card to draw 2. Unexpected Windfall, we will discard a card to draw 2 cards and get 2 treasure tokens. And Unlicensed Disintegration, we will destroy target creature, and if we control an artifact, it deals 3 damage to that creature's controller. For our sorceries, Cathartic Reunion, we can discard 2 cards to draw 3. Dead Revels, we can return up to 2 target creature cards from our graveyard to our hand. Earthquake deals X damage to each creature without flying and each player. Faithless Looting, we will draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. Fiery Confluence, we can choose 3 and we may choose the same mode more than once. Deal 1 damage to each creature, 2 damage to each opponent, or destroy target artifact. Flame Rift deals 4 damage to each player. Light Up the Stage, we can exile the top 2 cards of our library, and until the end of our next turn we can play those cards. Patriarchs Bidding, each player chooses a creature type, and each player returns all creatures of that type from their graveyard to the battlefield. Sign in Blood, target player draws 2 and loses 2. Sizzle deals 3 damage to each opponent. Tormenting Voice, we will discard a card to draw 2. Vicious Rumors deals 1 damage to each opponent. Each opponent discards a card and then mills the top card of their library, and we gain a life. And Victimize, we will choose 2 target creature cards in our graveyard. Sacrifice a creature, and if we do, we return those chosen cards to the battlefield tapped. And last but not least is our mana base. We will be keeping things very basic with 20 basic swamps and 15 basic mountains. And just like that, we reached the end of this terrifying tribal deck tech for Rakdos, Lord of Riots. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, tell your friends about us, and leave a comment down below. Let us know what commanders you would like to see us build around in the future. We really appreciate all of your support.